I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for October the 27th, 2025. Of course, we are now starting a new week. We are entering into the final week of October 2025. Soon, we'll only have November and December left in calendar year 2025. This was a very, very busy weekend for us, especially on Saturday, on Shabbat, having to lead the new members, new foundations class at our local congregation. And then, of course, we had the Shabbat service. And then afterward, we had to have a memorial service for a friend of ours who recently passed away. So Saturday was a full day. And then yesterday was actually a full day with a lot of errands and other behind the scenes types of things. And as things get colder, I have made the transition to long sleeves. So yes, we've definitely gone through a changing of the seasons. There was a lot of important news, which we'll be getting into later. But first, let's start with our theology roundup. And our teaching for today is taken from our ministry publication, Are Non-Jewish Believers Really a Part of Israel?, which argues for what I would label an enlarged kingdom realm of Israel theology, based on the tabernacle of David in Acts 15, Amos 9, a restored 12 tribes of Israel at the center, and enlarged borders to welcome in the righteous from the nations. Now, one of the things people often don't remember, especially because right now, we are having to confront replacement theology, the idea that the church is some new Israel, that God's promises to the ethnic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are no more. They've been transferred to this new church entity. 10 to 12, certainly 20 years ago, that was not the issue. The issue was the integration of non-Jewish believers into the polity of Israel, the commonwealth of Israel, and whether or not God had two groups of elect or a single group of elect, albeit internally diverse. So in our discussion today, we're going to be reviewing the concept of the Israel of God. And this is a difficult one. It's one that frequently gets thrown around from those of all sides. Those on the replacement theology side consider the Israel of God, Galatians 6:16, to be the church as a new Israel. Those on the Messianic Jewish side frequently, although not always, consider the Israel of God to just be the Messianic Jewish community or the ethnic Jewish people. But others have been known to think of the Israel of God as being representative of the Messianic kingdom, or the Messianic kingdom in the process of coming forth. So we're going to have this discussion, and we're going to be reviewing some of these opinions. All right, good. The screens have switched over. Galatians 6:15 and 16. For neither is circumcision anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creation. And those who will walk by this rule, peace and mercy be upon them and upon the Israel of God. New American Standard. Okay. In contemporary discussions of Messianic ecclesiology, ecclesiology is the study of God's elect, God's people, a great deal of importance will often be attributed to a closing remark made by the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Galatians. He informs his audience, and as many as order their lives by this rule, shalom upon them and mercy and upon the Israel of God. Galatians 6:16, Complete Jewish Bible. There is much debate surrounding the identity of the group classified as the Israel of God. Many view this as a reference to either the Jewish people or at least the first century Messianic Jewish believers. Others in past history have identified the Israel of God as being the New Testament church, which has apparently superseded or replaced Old Testament Israel as the new people of God. In today's Messianic community, we encounter those who interpret the Israel of God as either composing the Jewish people and or Messianic Jewish believers, or as those who possess membership in the restored Messianic kingdom of Israel, be they Jewish or non-Jewish. To consider what Galatians 6:16 communicates, much is actually contingent on how one chooses to approach the clause erene ep autus kai eleos kai epi ton Israel tu theu, and specifically the placement of the conjunction kai. Although there are many exceptions in the apostolic scriptures and Septuagint, to be sure, each contingent on contextual usage, the conjunction kai is most often rendered as and. Those who might choose to see the Israel of God as something separate could offer the placement of the conjunction kai in kai epi ton Israel tu theu, and upon the Israel of God as evidence of their view. Alternatively, a common usage of the conjunction kai can regard how it is explicative, i.e., a word or clause is connected by means of kai with another word or clause for the purpose of explaining what goes before it. And so that is, namely, from the BDAG lexicon. The Brown and Comfort interlinear actually renders erene ep autus kai eleos kai epi ton Israel tu theu along these lines. Peace upon them and mercy, even upon the Israel of God. The New International Version, which one may be more common to encounter, has peace and mercy to all who follow this rule, even to the Israel of God. Another alternative, as provided by Word Studies in the New Testament by Vincent, is that the conjunction kai is to be viewed as connective. This is what it has to say. Quote, the kai and may simply be connective, in which case the Israel of God may be different from as many as walk, etc., and may mean truly converted Jews, or the kai may be explicative, in which the Israel of God will define and emphasize as many as, etc., and will mean the whole body of Christians, Jewish and Gentile. In other words, they who walk according to this rule form the true Israel of God. The explicative kai is at best doubtful here and is rather forced, although clear instances of it may be found in 1 Corinthians 3:5, 15:38. It seems better to regard it as simply connective. Then, hosoi will refer to the individual Christians, Jewish and Gentile, and Israel of God to the same Christians regarded collectively and forming the true Messianic community. Unquote. Linguistically, it should be observed how the presence of the conjunction kai in the clause kai epi ton Israel tu theu can relate to the whole community in view. And with this conclusion, and upon the Israel of God, such a community would compose Jewish and non-Jewish believers who are fellow citizens of the Messianic kingdom of Israel. It is notable that if the Greek of Galatians 6:16b read with ekklesia, producing a rendering such as, and those who will walk by this rule, peace and mercy be upon them and upon the church / assembly / congregation of God, there would be absolutely no debate as to whether or not the ecclesia of God were a separate entity, to be differentiated from those who walk by this rule. Galatians 5:15-16a. In such a case, the ecclesia of God would be viewed as a description of the entire community of redeemed, with a specific blessing for those who were seen to walk by this rule. Only because some group of people is defined as the Israel of God, with the proper name Israel employed, is there even a debate over ecclesiology. Could the Apostle Paul at all have been altering the commonly perceived parameters as to what did or did not compose a group labeled with and associated with the name Israel? What if some within our contemporary Messianic community specifically said about Galatians 6:16? It cannot be avoided that it has been acknowledged how the Israel of God may include some kind of mixed faith community of both Jewish and non-Jewish believers. David H. Stern, who is notably committed to a form of bilateral ecclesiology model in his works, still had to reluctantly conclude in his Jewish New Testament commentary, quote, "He is indeed talking about genuine believers, both Jewish and Gentile, the Messianic community, but polemically, not didactically, as a concerned pastor writing against the Judaizers who threaten his work for the gospel. Believers are the Israel of God, God's people, God's quote-unquote Israel, so to speak," unquote. Stern went on to conclude, though, quote, "Nevertheless, Israel refers to the Jewish people, not the church," unquote. Now, Cohen, in the rather liberal Jewish annotated New Testament, is a bit more honest than Stern in assessing the people who compose the Israel of God. He concludes that it really does involve both Jewish and non-Jewish people who have recognized Jesus as the Messiah. Quote, "This is the first time Galatians uses Israel, and the only time anywhere that Paul qualifies Israel with of God, a locution never found in the Hebrew Bible. Elsewhere, Paul argues that not all Israelites truly belong to Israel, Romans 9:6. Israel according to the flesh, Greek, 1 Corinthians 10:18, is not the same as the real Israel, what Paul calls here the Israel of God. Presumably, Paul's opponents argued that if the Galatian Christians wished to be part of God's chosen, the people Israel, they needed to be circumcised and observe the Torah. Paul argues that the old distinction between circumcision and foreskin, between ethnic Israel and ethnic Gentile, no longer obtains, 328, because the true Israel, the Israel of God, consists of all those who are a new creation in Christ, Romans 2:29, Philippians 3:3, unquote. Obviously, today's Messianics might not totally agree with all of the specific details stated by Cohen, but he does conclude that the Israel of God composes a mixed group of Jewish and non-Jewish people. Paul's reference to the Israel of God really is a reference to all of those who are redeemed, both Jewish and non-Jewish, but who are most especially truly accomplishing the mission which God originally gave to ancient Israel. They are the ones who recognize themselves as composing the new creation, Galatians 6:15, and are those who should not only have grace and mercy issued to them, but should be about seeing grace and mercy issued to all in the world who need the salvation of Yeshua. In the case of the first century Galatians, they were a small group of the many more who would come to redemption in the Messiah of Israel, which will eventually culminate in how all Israel will be saved. Romans 11:26, involving the resolution of some important Tanakh prophecies. Romans 11:27-28, also Isaiah 59:20 and 21, 27:9, Jeremiah 31, 33, and 34. Most imperative for today's non-Jewish people to consider here is how those from the nations who have received the salvation of Israel's Messiah are to be vessels of mercy and grace to the Jewish people who have widely rejected him. Romans 11:31. There is valid reason to think that when Paul issued Arene Kai Eleos, or Shalom Vechesed, the Salkinson-Ginsburg Hebrew New Testament, that this was actually his adaptation of a Jewish blessing which would later be integrated into the traditional Shemone Ezra prayer. This blessing, repeated in countless synagogues and many Messianic congregations, should be very familiar. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. He who makes peace in his heights, may he make peace upon us and upon all Israel. Now respond, amen. Of course, Paul's wish of peace and mercy upon Israel could also have been easily derived from Psalm 125:5 and 128:6. But as for those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead them away with the doers of iniquity. Peace be upon Israel. Shalom al Yisrael. Psalm 125:5, New American Standard. Indeed, may you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. Shalom al Yisrael. Psalm 128:6, New American Standard. In the future, as discussions and debates over Messianic ecclesiology become more pronounced, the terminology Israel of God is likely to be thrown around as a talking point by those of multiple sides. Those who adhere to a bilateral ecclesiology will likely insist that the Israel of God only composes the Jewish people and/or Messianic Jewish community. Those who adhere to an ecclesiology of an enlarged kingdom realm of Israel, composing a restored Jewish people and the righteous from the nations, may instead stress how the Israel of God represents the redeemed Messianic kingdom ruled by Yeshua. Suffice it to say, even with there being strong support for the latter being what is in view, the fact that the Israel of God, Galatians 6:16, is mentioned in a closing salutation should indicate that this expression should never be used isolated by today's Messianic believers. If people choose to refer to members of Yeshua's Messianic kingdom of Israel as the Israel of God from Galatians 6:16, it should be quickly joined with concepts such as grafted in, Romans 11:16 and 17, and the Commonwealth of Israel, Ephesians 2:11-13. And that includes our discussion on the Israel of God. And of course, this will not be the last time we have discussions over ecclesiology. We do live in a time right now when replacement theology, supersessionism, is on the rise. It is not mutually exclusive for someone to believe that a non-Jewish believer in Israel's Messiah is integrated into the polity of Israel and is part of the Israel of God, i.e., the Messianic kingdom of Israel in the process of being restored, while at the same time speaking against supersessionism, the idea that the ethnic Jewish people have been replaced with some new church entity, as well as being able to stand against the evil legacy of supersessionism. And really, the only way, I think that a non-Jewish believer in today's Messianic community who reckons themselves grafted in, a part of the Commonwealth of Israel, and yes, a member of the Israel of God, to dispel claims of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, or anti-Zionism, is precisely to join in as co-laborers with Jewish believers in the Messianic mission, Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism, Israel solidarity. And if you are a part of that Messianic mission, as opposed to someone in one of the many non-Jewish Torah groups, Hebrew roots, whatever, it's clear enough you think that God is not finished with today's Jewish people. Whereas a lot of people, especially in different Reformed Christian settings, they think the church is the Israel of God, and they are not concerned at all with contemporary Jewish issues of Israel, and they couldn't give two proverbial blanks about today's Messianic Jewish movement. All right, so let's switch screens again as we will be getting into our news analysis. Okay, and once again, this has been taken from our ministry publication, Are Non-Jewish Believers Really a Part of Israel?, which was intended to actually sort through issues and controversies caused by bilateral ecclesiology 12 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and whether non-Jewish believers are part of the polity of Israel or some separate entity. The rise in supersessionism and with it anti-Zionism, anti-Judaism, that has come largely the past 2 years as a consequence of October the 7th, 2023, which we are still very much sorting through as a Messianic faith community. I don't know if we fully recognize how changing this really was. All right, so let's move on to our news roundup. And of course, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news roundup is time sensitive and the news, of course, changes from day to day. Number one, we continue to pray for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. The full return of all of the hostages remains. Number two, we pray for peace, Russia, Ukraine. And number three, we definitely pray for peace and reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. All the news stories I'm about to go through, these are links which I encounter passively on social media. You'll be able to look at them yourself later today when this episode is archived at MessianicApologetics.net. Okay, our first story. This is from People on Instagram. Following Prince Andrew's announcement that he would give up use of his titles, King Charles's younger brother has been removed from public recognition in another substantial way. People can confirm that Andrew's banner featuring his coat of arms has been removed from Windsor Castle. Of course, the headline here is Disgraced Prince Andrew's coat of arms taken down from Windsor Castle, a move reserved for traitors. Right. There are a lot of substantial questions out there, of course, regarding the British royal family. We mention this because there are people within the Messianic sphere of influence who believe that King Charles III now is the anti-Messiah or Antichrist. I absolutely do not believe that. And the main reason I don't believe that, aside from all of the eisegesis which goes into claiming that he's the beast, is that the British royal family has got way too much dirt and way too much of a stigma associated with it. It is not very popular. It is an endangered species. And actually, this thing about Prince Andrew's coat of arms being removed from Windsor Castle, it is an indication of how much dirt, how unpopular the royals truly are. And why you might say, oh, but I visited England, I visited Great Britain, the royals are popular and all this. Like, no, look all over the earth. Look at Africa, look at South Asia, look at the Caribbean. The royals are not popular. All right, let's move on to our next story. This is from the Times of Israel, the 23rd of October. Israel would lose all support from the U.S. if it annexes West Bank, Trump warns. And of course, this is something which has been discussed before. The Trump administration is juggling a lot of balls in its Mideast peace plan, trying to work with the Qataris, work with the Saudis, work with Egypt, work with Syria, try to work with Israel, try to get the hostages back home, and trying to, in some ways, have their cake and eat it too. The Gaza peace plan, the Mideast peace plan, the Trump plan, it's not going to please everybody. Some of us continue to wait. We continue to see what the long-term agenda of that is. There, of course, was a vote last week in the Knesset, symbolically at least, extending Israeli sovereignty over more of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. But Trump has, threatened Israel. Look, if you annex the West Bank, you're going to lose all of our support. So we're in a very, tenuous time right now. And of course, the point of all of that is, in order to make sense of it all, we have to look in terms of prophecy. We have to look at in terms of the end times. And from my reading of the end times, the land of Israel is going to be divided up. It is going to be split up. Subsequent to the return of the Messiah, are we actually going to see the restored Messianic kingdom and, of course, the peace which everyone hopes and prays for? All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. This is from the Instagram channel UAP Global from 5 days ago. And of course, that's Bill Maher. Bill Maher saying, it's not aliens, it's UAPs. That's unidentified aerial phenomenon. It's UAPs now, because changing the name makes it less terrifying. And Bill Maher, unidentified aerial phenomena, yeah, that'll calm our nerves. Reports say something 13 miles long is headed toward Earth, not a comet, light coming from the front. The Pentagon is now legally required to give updates on this stuff, and top officials admit there's weird things we don't know what are. Maher ends it perfectly. At the very least, we're under surveillance. Let's just hope they're only watching and not readying us. Not the first time we've talked about this three-eye atlas. That's what he's referring to, and it's rapidly approaching Earth. A lot of people, secular, religious, they talk about what's out there in the cosmos, what's out there from the final frontier. We wait, of course, but the whole point is that, well, maybe these craft are just, from a Bill Maher, they're just watching us. They're just observing us, right? These are the kinds of reports that are going to get more and more people asking questions about aliens. Are there other stories God has playing out in the universe? And of course, we as the body of Messiah need not just dismiss all those questions. We need to categorize the information as it comes across our path and be ready to possibly have some uncomfortable conversations ahead. It's not the only alien story we've got. All right, this is from Visegrad 24, and this is from the 24th of October. Of course, many of you all are aware of the actual genocide taking place of Nigerian Christians right now. Nigerian Christians conduct a funeral procession for yet another group of martyrs killed by Islamic terrorists. According to this, 35 Nigerian Christians are killed every day. And yet, far too many in the world are utterly silent about that. And some people say, why are we focusing on the Middle East, Gaza, when these other things are happening as well? There doesn't seem to be a proper balance of, you've got Gaza, of course, that involves Israel, that involves Jews, but you've got all these Christians being slaughtered by Islamicists in countries like Nigeria, and there's scarcely a peep. All right, so here we have from the Times of Israel. This is from October the 24th. So this is from Friday. 2 hostages may be released tonight. Ex-hostage Alon Ohel en route home. Israeli official reportedly says Hamas doesn't know location of 5 deceased hostages. And then here's another addition to this. Ireland votes for next president. Frontrunner is harsh Israel critic. And yes, we can confirm that Catherine Connolly is expected to be the next Irish president. And some of you all didn't like President Daniel M. Higgins. Apparently, Connolly is even worse. All right, so here's an opinion piece from the Jerusalem Post from Instagram. You all can look at the different slides with this later on. But here, the opinion is that American Judaism is ending not with a bang, but with fearful complacency. Adam Scott Bellows argues that American Jewish life faces decline through timidity rather than catastrophe. He contrasts today's generation, which has transformed resilience into digital activism, with ancestors who organized defense leagues and sent their sons to fight fascism, warning that democracies collapse when clarity becomes impolite. And indeed, how many, certainly diaspora American Jews, are afraid about what to do, post October the 7th. And I know that every Messianic Jewish congregation and synagogue is different, but not everybody has, that weekly reminder in a prayer time by their congregational leader or rabbi who just has to say, 2 or 3 sentences, take 2 or 3 minutes and say, right now, we know that our people are under attack all over the world. We need to remember what has happened this week, what's going on in Israel right now. Be sure to pray something special to the Lord about it. We're not hearing that enough. And indeed, and I'm not Jewish because of a lot of the voices who have been silent, who have not kept people up to date with what's going on. That's why this year we've started Messianic Insider 5 times a week, in particular with the news roundup. And why did we not do the news roundup earlier? Well, obviously it wasn't time. All right, here's an important article from the Jerusalem Post. And of course, it features Senator Ted Cruz, our senator here in Texas. The church is asleep right now. Ted Cruz calls on Christians to confront right-wing anti-Semitism. In a speech, Ted Cruz noted he has talked to Netanyahu about declining support for Israel on the right, and that the two men see the issue differently. Okay, so look, this is an article. It talks about how Cruz was speaking at John Hagee's church, Cornerstone Church, at a KUFI, that's Christians United for Israel event, and mainly the issue is that Christian support for Israel is on the decline. And many of us, and I think rightfully so, take that as a sign that we are getting closer to the Lord's return. The Christian support for Israel, Christian Zionism, it wasn't going to last indefinitely. And the October the 7th, 2023 Hamas attack and subsequent world response has contributed to declining Christian support for Israel. And we've got to just keep that in front of us as we move ahead. And indeed, recognizing the previous story where American Jews are getting complacent and American Judaism might, I'm not going to use the word die, but it might pass in complacency. What does that say about the Messianic community, which should be stepping up to the plate and at least keeping people aware of these matters? Some of these things are not just going to blow over. They're not going to blow over. And not only are they not going to blow over, there's not going to be a pre-trib rapture to take you out of the difficulty. You have to prepare yourself spiritually and psychologically for things to get more and more complicated. Okay, here's an important pass on from Mark Levin, where he posts this meme from Israel Hayom, Middle East peace process, senior Saudi official, no normalization with Israel's current government. Mark Levin says, so the Saudi monarch is now openly demanding that the Israeli democracy drop the prime minister as a condition of normalization. I assume he's trying to enlist our country in his effort. And Mark Levin says, tell him and his 9/11 terrorist pals to screw off. Now, this is something which, of course, can change from day to day. people in politics, people in world leadership, they say things in the heat of the moment that they later have to retract and apologize for. But it is notable how there are people in the Saudi government who are definitely talking about normalization with the Israeli government. That's also, of course, huge. All right, from Newsmax, October the 24th, President Donald Trump and top Navy leaders are discussing a new generation of warships, the Golden Fleet, designed to replace many of today's ships with bigger, more powerful vessels meant to face growing threats from China and other rivals. Of course, at his inauguration in January, Trump declared that we are entering into the golden age of America. And there have been a lot of people disputing what that means. Does it mean that Trump is the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist? Is he going to set things up for the arrival of the anti-Messiah or Antichrist? Or is it instead an emphasis on paying down the national debt, restoring American supremacy in the world, being more fiscally responsible, returning prosperity to the American people? I mean, there are all these different factors. Well, apparently for Trump, it means, building a massive ballroom where the East Wing of the White House once stood. And it means something like building a golden fleet for the U.S. Navy. Some of you all may remember the Great White Fleet, mainly built by President Theodore Roosevelt, and how that was partially a cause of the Spanish-American War. So, what is the Great Golden Fleet going to be responsible for? We just wait and see. Okay, Russia and Ukraine. This is kind of serious. Visegrad 24, October the 24th, 7:04 p.m. There's a 5-second clip. Ukrainian suicide struck the Russian oil refinery in Ryazan yesterday, setting it on fire. I assume that's a suicide drone. It accounts for 5% of Russia's total refining capacity. Yeah, not good. But at least we can acknowledge that it's an industrial target, not a civilian target. Okay, so here's a post. It's a little dated, but it's from Jack Hibbs. This is on Instagram, where he's being interviewed with a number of others, and he says, God in his mercy gave us a reprieve, and with that comes responsibility. We can't pull off the throttle. And what Jack Hibbs is mainly referring to is, and of course, he's a pre-tribulationist, he's dispensational, all of that, Calvary Chapel. But what he's mainly referring to is how the return of Donald Trump to the White House has given American Christians a reprieve. I've even referred to it as a line extension of time, and they can't be complacent with it. You're going to see your religious liberties and freedoms remain intact for a little while longer. We can't take this time for granted. We have to maximize it for the purposes of serving the kingdom. That's what Jack Hibbs is mainly referring to, and it's important to keep that in mind. And I don't know how many people are aware of the great gift of time they have been given. We're certainly going to take advantage of it as best we can. Okay, here's more with Russia, Ukraine, Visegrad 24, October the 24th. Russia is launching ballistic missiles at Kiev. Yeah, this is not good because we got some other things to say about Russia in just a few moments. Here's something which is doubtlessly going to get a lot of people upset. Open source intel, October the 25th. So this is Saturday morning. Kamala Harris says she may run for president again. Now, of course, this is something which can easily change. We also know that Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California, he's also expressed possible interest in running for president. We're not even halfway through the first, we're not even full through the first year of the second Trump administration. We're coming up in about 2 weeks or so on the 1-year mark of election 2024. So, but you're still going to hear, rumors politically about who could possibly run as the Democratic candidate. And you're already hearing it about who the Republican candidate's going to be. All right, from Tony Perkins, I'm praying for President Trump. This is on October the 24th. Telling Israel it cannot exercise sovereignty within its own borders to appease terror-supporting regimes like Turkey and Qatar is deeply troubling. Gaza has never been the only threat to Israel's security. Judea and Samaria, the heartland of Israel, often misleadingly called the West Bank, have been the site of more than 100 terrorist attacks in the past 2 years. The danger has only intensified with the release of 2,000 imprisoned terrorists back into Samaria as part of the 20-point Gaza peace plan. Mr. President, please reconsider this position. Okay, and Tony Perkins is certainly able to have his opinion, and there are some definite points of truth with what he says. At the same time, if we are geared toward the end time scenario, a lot of these things are going to happen. You're not going to be able to, with the beast coming on the scene, and I'm not saying that it's President Trump, but the person who could come after Trump or is already there behind the scenes, possibly orchestrating things, has got all these balls to juggle, and sooner or later, that person, supernaturally, demonically empowered, charismatic enough, is just going to be able to, like, yeah, whatever you say, whether that person is Arab, Muslim, Jewish, Israeli, or even American Christian. We have to keep that in the forefront of understanding what's happening in the Mideast. Okay, to the American home front. This is from Rapid Response 47, sending on a post that the president put on Truth Social, where the president said, just in, documents show conclusively that Christopher Wray, deranged Jack Smith, Merrick Garland, Lisa Monaco, and other crooked lowlifes from the failed Biden administration signed off on Operation Arctic Frost. They spied on senators and congressmen, women, and even taped their calls. They cheated and rigged the 2020 presidential election. These radical left lunatics should be prosecuted for their illegal and highly unethical behavior. So here you got the president obviously commenting on events from election 2020 to the present, whether you agree, disagree, whether you think that this was an excellent post by the president or you think it was poorly placed. The results of it are not going to be good because Americans' trust in their government, their elected officials, persons of importance is going to be challenged and is going to drop because of it. And there's no winners here. That's why a big part of our daily prayers has to be for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. But this is doubtlessly not going to be the last post the president makes about that whole issue. Okay, so speaking of the president, this is from Open Source Intel, Saturday, October the 25th. There's a 47-second audio clip. Trump, when asked about meeting Putin again, we're going to have to know that we're going to make a deal. I am not going to be wasting my time. So, of course, the president, he wants to see a peace deal, Russia, Ukraine. He wants to see the United States brokering it. He wants to see himself brokering it. But if President Putin isn't that serious about it, he's not going to, as he said, waste his time. Okay, so here's another one from President Trump. Open source intel. You all can read this more fully later on. President Trump, Hamas is going to have to start returning the bodies of the deceased hostages, including 2 Americans, quickly, or the other countries involved in this great peace will take action. So this is from Saturday afternoon at 3:07 p.m. So the president, of course, is speaking very strong words about his peace plan, Israel-Gaza. Hamas has got to start returning more of the remains of the hostages. Otherwise, there are going to be some problems. Look, we know there's going to be some starting and stop with his peace plan. Here's a good one just for information's sake, how the U.S. Command Center in Israel operates and why it worries Jerusalem. This is from 2 days ago on YNet Global. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited the new American-led command center in Kiryat Gat, where multinational troops oversee the Gaza ceasefire. This growing U.S. role is fueling unease in Jerusalem over Israel's shrinking control. For years, Israel's greatest fear was that the conflict with the Palestinians would become international. That has now happened quietly over the past month under the cover of the ceasefire and the Trump plan, right under everyone's noses in Kiryat Gat. So here, at least from this opinion, the idea is that now you've got the Trump peace plan, you've got the return of the hostages, but the situation, the security situation in Gaza is going to be overseen by an international force, yes, involving the Americans, but there are those in Israel who think Israel's going to lose control of the situation. Now, we're still in the very early stages of the Trump peace plan, so we still have a ways to go to see how this is going to be implemented. Okay, we've got 9 more stories. We've got some important things to discuss here. Okay, as we know, the president is presently on an Asian trip. So this is from the president's historic peace between Thailand and Cambodia. President Trump and Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim hosted the prime ministers of Thailand and Cambodia for the signing of the Kuala Lumpur Peace Accords, a historic peace declaration. So while many of us are not that familiar with the situation in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, the president is trying to position himself as a president of peace. And of course, we do believe in peace in the world as believers. We don't believe that killing other people is a good thing. We pray for world peace because small situations can get out of control and become large situations. And of course, with something like this, the Kuala Lumpur agreements, the president is trying to build momentum for ongoing support with his Mideast peace plan, but also the big one now, Russia and Ukraine. Okay, here's an ongoing situation, which we, of course, will continue to monitor. It's from Breitbart, the 26th of October. The U.S. and China have finalized a deal to transfer majority ownership of the American version of TikTok to new owners, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent revealed on Sunday. The United States and China have reached a final agreement on the transfer of TikTok's ownership, resolving a long-standing dispute over the popular video-sharing platform's ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And indeed, there's not a huge messianic presence on TikTok precisely because of different bot comment activity or other types of things. But a lot of people will wait and will see what can come from this transfer of ownership. Okay, here we go. This is from the New York Post, yesterday, the 26th of October. The truth is under there. A popular UFO reporting app has recorded thousands of sightings of unidentified submersible objects, USOs. You've heard of UAPs, now it's USOs, near U.S. waterways, phenomenon which high-ranking U.S. Navy officials warned could pose a threat to national security. So we've got objects flowing, up in the sky. Now we've got objects under the water. And of course, we don't fully know, but it just begs a lot of speculation and a lot of questions. Are these kinds of things, UFOs, UAPs, but rather than landing on the ground or landing underground, they land underwater? Who knows? All right, from Open Source Intel Defender. This is a real serious one, and there's a 2-minute, 30-second clip. This is from yesterday evening at 8:47. In a televised briefing earlier today to President Vladimir Putin, Russian Chief of the General Staff, General Valery Gerasimov, I mispronounced that, sorry about it, announced that the Russian armed forces had carried out a successful test on October 21 of the 9M730 Berezovnik, also mispronounced that, a low-flying nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed cruise missile in development since at least 2018, with Gerasimov claiming that the test missile traveled 14,000 kilometers and was airborne for 15 hours, likely over the Arctic and northern Russia. Okay, so there's a new Russian missile on the market. And indeed, this is getting a lot of people very upset about President Putin. And it rightfully should get them upset. So our next story from Visegrad 24, and I'm just going to give you the headline here. This was posted this morning at 5:34 a.m. Trump criticizes Russia's Berezovnik missile tests, reminds of U.S. nuclear submarine near Russian shores. U.S. President Donald Trump slammed Vladimir Putin's announcement of successful tests of nuclear-powered missiles, calling it inappropriate. He should end the war, Trump told reporters. A war that was supposed to last a week has been going on for almost 4 years. He should focus on that, not on testing missiles. Indeed, do we want to see a peace agreement? Russia-Ukraine, the conclusion of all these young men and women dying for really no cause at all? Or are we just going to see more of this posturing on the part of Russia? Okay, 4 more. Okay, here is one. There's a 1 minute, 50-second clip with it. Open source intel. This is from this morning. Trump on running for a 3rd term. I haven't really thought about it, but I have the best poll numbers I've ever had. I ended 8 wars, and he says, about to end 9, Russia, Ukraine. I would love to do it. Now, is this just, President Trump posturing? Legally, he is limited to 2 terms. Of course, there have already been people, especially like Steve Bannon, we've talked about that, talked about it last week, who've said, well, yeah, there's going to be plans for a Trump 3rd term. How? The only way I see that even being remotely possible is if you interpret a president being limited to 2 terms as 2 consecutive terms. But in all honesty, I do believe that Donald Trump is getting older. It will be time for him to hand over the presidency to a younger successor, whether it's J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or someone like that, someone who is in his administration now proving himself. But the talk is there, and that's definitely going to get a lot of people upset. And it gets people in prophecy even thinking that, well, who does he think he is? The beast? I don't think he's the beast, but these kinds of statements do get people talking. Okay, so here is a retweet from Ted Cruz, October the 27th. So this is from early this morning, talking about how, yes, there's a Palestinian struggle out there, imperialism, but most especially talking about Elias Rodriguez, the one who was responsible for murdering 2 Jews in Washington, D.C. this past spring. And here you have Eyal Jacoby saying, Zohran Mamdani, he is the front runner in the New York mayoral campaign. Democrat Socialists of America signed onto a statement calling to release Elias Rodriguez, the terrorist who executed 2 Jews in Washington, D.C. last spring. And indeed, right now, it looks like Mamdani is most likely to become the mayor of New York. Of course, can't know for certain until the election. Are we going to see an exponential rise in anti-Zionism in New York? And then what's going to come of the economy of New York? The main financial hub of the world. There are all these kinds of questions now which are circulating because of Mamdani. And, I agree with Ted Cruz. This is insane. This is from today, October the 27th, Newsmax. President Trump said that President Putin should end the war in Ukraine instead of testing a nuclear-powered missile, adding that the U.S. had a nuclear submarine positioned off Russia's coast. So Yeah, that's a main part of today's news cycle. And then finally, and we'll close with this one from open source intel. Speaking of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Zelensky, Trump is concerned about escalation. I think that if Putin doesn't stop, we need something to stop him. Sanctions is one such weapon, but we also need long-range missiles. Yeah. Putin testing a nuclear-powered missile. I mean, there are a lot of terms we can use to respond to that. But once again, we are reminded as God's people that He is on the throne. He is in complete control of what is happening. We, as redeemed men and women of faith, have access to the infinite power of heaven. We can call on legions of angels as His sons and daughters to protect us. We cry out to the Lord every day for His supernatural provision, for His divine protection of ourselves, our families, our loved ones, people we care about. And we've got to stay up to date with what's occurring, because the possibility exists that we're going to see something dramatic in the not too distant future. We pray that something dramatic doesn't happen, but we see too many things in motion, whether they are directly concerned with the end time scenario or indirectly concerned with it. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not, please do check out my website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access a wide array of free articles, frequently asked questions entries, back issues of Outreach Israel News. You can check into some back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, and look at a lot of our adventures from over the years. And please, in order to help give this live stream more exposure in the world of ideas, you can do this for free. Be sure to give this live stream a thumbs up. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.